Life aboard seagoing vessels in the past and until today is governed by strange beliefs and mythologies, with many sailors vehemently superstitious about the meaning of certain behaviours and symbols while at sea. Faced with the perils and mysteries of the oceans, seagoing mariners have adopted beliefs from anywhere and in anything that seems to work in keeping them safe. Here are 5 amazing stories of mariners, myths and the events around them. Number 5. The Haunted Drum. It has long been believed that a drum, once owned by the English naval commander Sir Francis Drake, is haunted. Sir Francis Drake was an Elizabethan explorer who took the snare drum emblazoned with his coat of arms with him on his seafaring journeys, circumnavigating the world between 1577 and 1596. Finally, as he lay dying of dysentery on the coast of Panama, he ordered that the drum be returned to England, where it should be beaten in times of threat, in order that he could return to defend the country. Eerily, the drum has been heard to roll out ghostly warnings on its own. It was recorded that the drum was heard to beat when the Mayflower left Plymouth for America in 1620, and gave a grumbling growl when Napoleon was brought as a prisoner to Plymouth after the Battle of Waterloo. It was heard beating a further 3 times last century. The first was in 1914, when the First World War started. 4 years later, the drum was heard aboard the flagship Royal Oak in the final week of the war, when the German fleet steamed into Scapa Flow to surrender to Allied troops. A drum began an echoing tattoo somewhere on the ship, which was searched twice by messengers and then by the commander himself. With every man at his battle station, no drum or drummer was found, but the victory roll continued right up until Royal Oak dropped anchor, when it stopped as mysteriously as it had begun. The drum was to be heard again in 1940, during the retreat from Dunkirk in the Second World War. Number 4. The Flying Dutchman. Long before it inspired Wagner's opera, the Flying Dutchman legend has been known to countless generations of sailors across the globe, and its sightings interpreted as a portent of disaster. In 1680, a Dutch East India commissioned sailing ship set sail for the Dutch East Indies settlement of Batavia, now Jakarta, Indonesia. Its captain, Hendrik van der Decken, was a skilled, fearless but unscrupulous seaman who had been bragging in the Amsterdam port taverns that he would return from the voyage with a fortune. The journey started well, but near the Cape of Good Hope, a sudden tropical storm pounded the vessel, shredding the sail and disabling the rudder. The southeasterly gale battered the ship for weeks, while Van der Decken became infuriated as every nautical strategy he employed saw him failing to make headway around the Cape. The legend records that in a frenzy he shouted a curse to God and challenged the devil to keep him cruising until Judgment Day. The ship never reached Batavia, and since then there have been countless sightings of the phantom vessel, usually followed by bad luck. Some have explained the foreboding nature of the apparition, saying that the ship's crew was cursed because of violent and criminal behaviour that took place aboard it, including murder and piracy. The ship is said to be condemned to sailing the oceans and open seas forever, doomed never to return to port. Some famous sightings of the Flying Dutchman have been recorded. In 1881, Prince George, who later became British monarch George V, was serving as a midshipman on the HMS Bacchante with his older brother, Prince Albert Victor, later King Edward VIII. He recorded in the Royal Ship Log that on July the 11th, while sailing the Pacific off the coast of Australia, he witnessed the ghost ship shrouded in a strange glowing red light and saw a figure in ancient dress on its poop deck. The next day, a crew member fell from the rigging and died. In 1939, a crowd of beachgoers at False Bay, a seaside location on the tip of South Africa, watched astounded as the spectre of the ancient ship in full sail emerged out of the haze and sailed majestically towards the sands, despite the lack of breeze. The British South Africa Annual of that year reported that despite heading for disaster by running aground, the ship vanished into thin air before the eyes of the onlookers. The last recorded sighting of the Flying Dutchman was in September 1942 by 4 people sitting on their balcony in Mweli Point, Cape Town. They witnessed the ghostly vessel sailing into Table Bay and disappearing behind Robben Island. The writer Nicholas Montserrat also claimed to have seen the ship's apparition while sailing the Pacific Ocean during his World War II service. Animal superstitions. The British Admiralty still takes enormous care over the naming of new ships in the fleet. For example, reptile names are now almost completely banned. The British Navy has in the past lost 4 serpents, 4 vipers, 3 lizards, 2 snakes, 2 dragons and other vessels carrying the names cobra, adder, alligator and crocodile. In ancient sailing days, dead mariners were thought to have been reincarnated in the bodies of petrels and seagulls. If one of these birds appeared over the ship in mid-ocean, it was seen as a sign of storms to come. The bird that was regarded with the most dread was the huge albatross of the southern seas. To kill one brought an eternity of bad luck, as described by Coleridge in his poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In 1959, the cargo ship Cowpian Star was transporting an albatross across the Atlantic to a German zoo. When the ship docked at Liverpool with engine problems, the crew abandoned ship, claiming that the bird was responsible for a series of mishaps on the voyage. Only when the bird died a day later in its cage was the captain able to find a replacement crew. Mentioning rabbits and pigs at sea is also strangely taboo, even on modern liners. And the old adage about rats deserting a sinking ship is probably based on ancient observations. While rats do not instinctively desert a sinking ship, they would have lived on the bilges of the early vessels and migrated out if a ship sprang a leak and started to take in water. Droves of rats scurrying out of a ship's hold may well have made sailors doubtful of a vessel's seaworthiness. 2. Religion taboos. Reading aloud or quoting phrases from the Bible at sea has always carried a terrible risk, except during a burial. In 1707, a condemned sailor being marched to the yardarm gallows is recorded as shouting the words of the 109th Psalm. Let his days be few, and let another take his office. Let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. Let there be none to extend mercy unto him. Admiral Sir Cloudesley's Shovel had passed sentence on the man on his flagship, the Association. Later in the same year, the Association and 2 other ships sank off the Isles of Scilly near the Cornish coast in England with the loss of 2,000 men. According to the legend, Sir Cloudesley's Shovel was washed ashore unconscious and buried alive. The woman who had found him on the beach later confessed on her deathbed that she had murdered the Admiral, hacked off his fingers to retrieve the ruby and enamel rings he wore. In other superstitions, Christian symbols and even followers of the faith are taboo on or near ships. Some fishermen will stay ashore for the day if they meet a priest or nun on their way to the harbour. In the Faroe Islands, between Norway and Iceland, whale hunters believe that they will lose their huge prey if a boat with a minister on board sails between them and the shore. By contrast, seasoned sailors of the 18th century would advise new ship hands to get a crucifix tattooed on your back. It was not uncommon for a sailor to be subjected to 24 or more lashes for being drunk on duty, and it was thought that the face of Christ was a deterrent, not only to the boatswain's mate wielding the whip, but also the lash itself, causing it to cringe away. 1. Harnessing the wind. Traditional sailors were so concerned about the prospect of damaging winds that the act of whistling was generally banned at sea. It was thought to encourage high winds, and only allowed when the ship was resting on a calm sea or shrouded in mist. Another way thought to bring or buy a calm was to throw a coin overboard. Until recently, even lighthouse keepers will blame one of their number for stormy weather and require them to hurl a coin into the sea.